All right, hey everyone, welcome back. It's me, Moonbuster Green. Today we're going to go over the Gold Bat chapter, which is a very interesting chapter because I want to say it's the story in Kikaida that changed the least between the toku, the manga, and the anime. This has just been one constantly told story that hasn't really changed that much, but it has evolved, and that's what we're going to go over.
この番組はヨランのスポンサーの提供でお送りします。
Alright, so yeah, episode 6, chapter 5 of the manga is Gold Bat, and it's a slightly longer story. Now, a couple of notes on this one before we even get down into it. So, for the anime and the manga, even though the character is Gold Bat, the main story here is taken straight from a Toku episode, which was originally about Gold Wolf, but let's go over the Toku a second. So Gold Bat is first mentioned in episode 1 as one of Komyoji's original 13 androids, and Gold Bat in the Toku is episode 15, Gold Bat and the Cursed Shelf in the past. So the notable story here is that the episode actually starts with Kikaida dying in an immediate battle with Gold Bat, who flies him 1,000 feet in the air and slams him into a canyon. But it turns out this is a Kikaida training dummy that Gil made to strengthen his Destructoids. Now, this destroyed copy is later found by Handpan, who was weirdly sticking out the area, completely dressed as Charlie Chaplin, 100% no explanation given. The lack of why it's happening is kind of hilarious. Now, the main scam dark going on in this episode is actually that Gold Bat disguised himself as Mitsuko's long-lost brother, Taro Komyoji. He's called Taro in the Toku and Ichiro in the manga, by the way, and he's been dead for over 18 years, and Taro makes up this nonsense story that he wasn't dead, Dark was just keeping him prisoner the entire time. Now, Jiro is instantly suspicious and instantly logical that Taro is just a dark android posing as a long dead man, but for some reason Mitsuko acts like a real idiot in this episode and gives Taro a complete pass the entire time, treating Jiro like total garbage for his rightful and correct suspicion. Jiro even says they should do a test to make sure he's not a robot, and Mitsuko instantly shuts him down. Anyway, after this, Taro and Jiro go off together, and Taro pulls some Clark Kent nonsense, turning into Golden Bat to try and kill Jiro, and whenever it goes wrong, he comes back as Taro to set Jiro up again in another hilarious situation. Mitsuko even loses it on Jiro that he's just treating Taro badly because he's jealous of him. Then Taro tricks Mitsuko into getting Jiro's blueprints and then tries to steal his conscience circuits, and when he does, he finally reveals that he was Gold Bat all along and Mitsuko was acting like an idiot. He even calls Mitsuko an idiot for considering that Taro would be alive, considering that he's been dead for almost 20 years now. Golden Bat then does briefly kidnap Mitsuko, and finally Kikaida kills him with extreme prejudice down by a seaport. Oh, and he calls him a scumbag as he kills him, which is very base Kikaida. Anyway, despite this being the Gold Bat episode, this is not actually the episode of the Toku that the manga is based on. In a surprising swap out, the manga/anime Gold Bat arc is actually a rewrite of episode 11 of the Toku, Gold Wolf Cries in Hell, which tells a similar story about a similar Destructoid who also has a conscience circuit and who also abducts Mitsuko and Masaru. So Gold Wolf is a pretty serious episode for the live action. The live action show is usually all over the place tonally, but this episode is pretty sad. In this episode, we're introduced to Gold Wolf, a uniquely weird Destructoid who Professor Komyoji installed a prototype version of the conscious circuit into. This prototype version has a very limited effect that renders Gold Wolf a human, and when he's a human, he looks like a guy dressed as a vampire, and when he's a Destructoid, he's an obedient servant of Gil who kills cops and does all the bad things. The twist here is, though, because he has his prototype conscious circuits installed, in the daytime when Gold Wolf turns into a human, he experiences intense regret and shame for all the bad things he did when he was a werewolf. Oh, and the mega weird thing I forgot is that this episode also contains a fake Mitsuko, like the Thunderdog chapter of the manga, but the catch is that the fake Mitsuko is trying to catch Dr. Komyoji, not Jiro, and then the real fun twist here is that real Mitsuko catches the fake Mitsuko and points out that she looks nothing like her, and then she's revealed to be a female Dark Combat Man. Anyway, fake Mitsuko helps capture the real Mitsuko and Masaru and hands them over to Gold Wolf. Now, Gold Wolf in the show is even more conflicted and kind of even more sympathetic than the manga version. He actually knows enough about what he's doing wrong that he tries to correct it and do the right thing when he's human. He actually tries to free Mitsuko and shows immense remorse for Dr. Komyoji, and Mitsuko eventually tries to get him to switch sides, which he briefly does, but Gil doesn't care because he knows as soon as the sun goes down, he'll turn back into a werewolf and go berserk and violent, and he does. So yeah, he instantly changes back to evil, and Kikaida fights him and actually loses, but then Mitsuko fixes Jiro with spare parts she steals from other destroyed androids who are all down by the rock quarry where apparently Jiro's been killing them in every episode. That's like a constant place that the people are self-conscious of. Okay, anyway. Also, Professor Komyoji shows up to fix Jiro despite still having amnesia. And then finally, Gold Wolf Trojan horses himself into the house where Professor Komyoji is staying by covering himself with styrofoam. And no one fell for that. The episode is also color corrected to look like it's shot at night, which I want to say only works half the time, making me realize that a lot of 70s toku just really didn't do extended sequences at night. Anyway, Gold Wolf turns back into a human and almost stops fighting, but Gil plays the flute again, which forces him to transform back. Jiro reluctantly fights Wolf, and I want to say he tries to save him, but when Wolf transforms into a Destructoid, he's completely feral, and Kikaida basically kills him on reflex to death. He does transform back into a human as he explodes, and Kikaida actually cries at the end of the episode regretting his actions because he killed a good man. Now anyway, that brings us to the manga. The manga version of the Gold Bat is also weird in that he's a combination of Gold Wolf from the Toku and Gold Bat from the Toku fused together into one character. And he actually has a design that looks like Gold Wolf's design, but he has the wings from Gold Bat. Now, on the other hand, for the anime, I want to say this is one of the episodes of the anime that absolutely follows the manga the most, but there's probably still about 20% of things that are different because of the difference between the anime and the manga being different formats, and the fact the manga was made in the 70s and the anime was made in the 2000s. So anyway, let's dig into this one because this is one of the greatest story arcs in the show. So the anime starts with Mitsuko grieving out over the way things have played out with Jiro and being regretful, and Mitsuko starting to realize that she's semi-attracted to Jiro and knowing out loud that it's messed up. Hanpei shows up at the door and tries to explain to Mitsuko that Komyoji was in dark, and out of nowhere Gold Bat attacks them. Now back at the manga, this scene actually played out already at the end of the second Orange Ant fight, and Hanpei wasn't there. In the anime, Hanpei gets instantly KO'd, and Mitsuko gets flown away by Golden Bat. Jiro is still sadly wandering around playing his guitar at a construction site, thinking about Miyuki from the last episode and like the nature of human love. Gold Bat calls Kikaider and invites him over to have a robot duel to the death. Now back at the manga, things play out a lot less simply. After Bat takes Mitsuko, Jiro finds Hanpei outside and hires him as a detective to track down Mitsuko because she's been kidnapped. Jiro ends up giving Hanpei a lot of the Komyoji's family money, which is ridiculous, and then Hanpei finds a clue on the ceiling and tells Jiro where to go from this one clue. Now, after this, the anime and the manga sync up again, so the next scene is perfectly adapted as Gold Bat reveals himself and that he has a conscious circuit, but the conscious circuit makes him a gentleman, and that even though he doesn't appreciate what he's doing, he's just following orders. The only thing different that the anime does is that it has Mitsuko get some more information that she got in the first chapter of the manga about how Komyoji and Gil first met each other. Then we move into a massive plot twist that Mitsuko was semi-aware of Professor Gil when she was a child because her parents worked for Professor Gil. Mitsuko also realizes that they're inside her old house, and that the phone Gold Bat was using was a phone that was previously purchased by her mother. Now, this is a big change, and this is a cool twist. In the manga, Bat just took Mitsuko to his Halloween haunted house mansion, and he calls it several times Bat Mansion in the manga. I should point out that it is the exact same house in the manga, but the anime makes it cooler by saying it's the previous Komyoji house, whereas in the manga, it was just this crazy Halloween castle. Now, it seems like Mitsuko's mom abandoned them after Masaru was born because she probably couldn't stomach giving birth to 2 children while playing a character, which is still a really fucked up situation. I guess that was her I give up point. The anime then also adds this really fucked up scene where very old Professor Komyoji tells very young Mitsuko that she has to now be Masaru's mother, which is just effing crazy to tell to like a 6-year-old, but terrible situation. Anyway, the flashback eventually ends and we continue the manga situation of Mitsuko just having a long conversation with Gold Bat. Gold Bat is a total theater kid, a guy dressed as Dracula, and he's teasing the shit out of Mitsuko about the fact she is actually in love with Jiro because he knows it. The dialogue here syncs up perfectly with the manga, although in the manga, some of his theatrical metaphors are actually drawn on screen with like weird Disney animals. Alright, so that brings us to episode 7 of the anime, which is still covering chapter 5. Which is just a really long chapter in the manga, and it's basically the end of volume 1. All right, so then episode 7 actually does show us Ichiro Komyoji working on an early prototype robot. We get a few seconds of manga scenes, and then we get some more anime exclusive content of exactly how Professor Gil and Komyoji first met, and it's kind of insane to see Gil here before he went fully off the wagon into I lay around in my bathrobe all day being a megalomaniac. It's also interesting that Komyoji first meets Mitsuko's mom, who's working as Gil's translator, I guess. And then we also see the 13 original Komyoji androids who actually are brought up in the anime. The anime doesn't mention them by name, but it does show all 13 of them on screen. The important cameos here, let's see if I can identify them all. Okay, that's Blue Buffalo, who is not featured in the anime properly at all. I'm not sure what this one is. This one's Gray Bear from the next episode. Anyway, then we get some more backstory that Komyoji directly installed a conscious circuit in Gold Bat. And yeah, a similar scene is later shown in the manga regarding the development of Kikaider. And so far, this episode, the one before it, and episode 1 are all the most from the manga that we've ever gotten. And then the anime brings it back that Professor Gil killed Ichiro, which caused the chain of events that started the story. In the anime, he gets electrocuted to death, which is a slight deviation from the manga. And that's better than just Ichiro died because of some random company. In this case, it's just literally that Professor Gil manipulated these people at every turn to serve his own purposes. Anyway, Mitsuko finally realizes that what's happened at this point in the anime and that her mom was working for Gil the entire time. And I think it takes her a little bit longer to fully piece together the full story, but she's aware of all the pieces and how fucked it all is. Now, one big difference at this point in the manga is that Gold Bat puts Mitsuko and Jiro together into an acid chamber, and Jiro has to show off how heroic it is. Whereas in the anime, it's not the real Mitsuko, it's a hologram of Mitsuko, and it's not an acid chamber because animating water is difficult. Trust me, I've animated some water, it sucks. So anyway, instead of water, it's a hive of electric cyborg bats, which is maybe a callback to the skipped over Thunderdog chapter. Anyway, so then there's another direct manga parallel where Jiro won't transform because he's self-conscious of how ugly his Kikaider form is. And the anime answers that moment by having Mitsuko give Jiro a pep talk that she doesn't care about how he looks. While in the manga, Mitsuko basically calls out Bat for killing them in a cowardly indirect way with acidic water. And meanwhile in the anime, Mitsuko then fully loses her shit at Golden Bat in about the same way over the fact that he has an overblown sense of how good and perfect humans are, while viewing androids as this inferior lesser class of existence, but by being wise enough to know that it's wrong. I should mention that in the manga, this overall conflict is never resolved at this time, and Jiro just ends up fighting Gold Bat without transforming. Anyway, so in the anime, Jiro eventually uses his guitar to make supersonic vibrations that messes up all the cyborg Bat's sonar, so Golden Bat decides to take him on in a one-on-one fight like the manga. Now, in the anime, Jiro fights untransformed too, but he finally does transform near the end of the fight where Mitsuko almost gets impaled by a knife. But then the big twist in the anime is that Golden Bat kamikazes himself to avoid Mitsuko getting killed, which is actually a callback to the Toku, where Gold Wolf was a good guy at the end of the day. So anyway, Gold Bat reveals that Komyoji is still alive, and then Saburo shows up and throws a knife in his throat. Mitsuko cries and forces Jiro to stay, which is, in my view, a really good way to change the outcome of the story, because in the manga, this has a really dumb ending. At the end of the manga, Jiro ditches Mitsuko for hurting his feelings again, which is almost comedic at this point after everything they've gone through, especially considering all the numerous times that Kikaida has gone out of his way to save Mitsuko. I do think there is a big difference in the anime and the manga, that they made Gold Bat truly good at the end, and they made him more like Gold Wolf, and that made him more of a worthy foe in the end, and I think that's why this episode is so memorable. Anyway, so that was a pretty messy story arc. Next time we're going to cover the Gray Bear manga chapter and episode 9 of the anime, which is also about Gray Bear.